enjoying each other's company. And really, you know, let's face it, music is meant to be fun.
Phil Collins, the man behind iconic hits, rarely got a normal job. He traded acting for music, and the world mostly rejoiced. But fame, like any double-edged sword, comes with its fair share of feuds. Are these reported clashes real or just whispers? One thing's for sure, some fellow stars just don't vibe with Phil, and they're not shy about letting the world know. While Collins has remained cool under fire most of the time, there's one feud that stands out as the ultimate clash. Stay tuned to discover who has Phil Collins banging on the drums of discontent more than anyone else. Phil Collins versus Paul McCartney. In most cases, any rock musician would be happy to share a few moments of air with Paul McCartney. His time with the Beatles may have passed, but it hasn't stopped more than a few musicians from writhing in fear the moment Macca mentioned their name. While it's true that most individuals can put their pride aside when they're performing for an audience, McCartney still wasn't as kind as Collins had hoped he would be when he asked for an autograph. Even though the drummer was already a huge Beatles fan when filming A Hard Day's Night, he recalled Paul McCartney's icy reaction when he pestered him for an autograph. Collins claims that McCartney treated him like a child while he was speaking to his wife Nancy and did all else he could to put him down. This was one of Collins's last conversations with McCartney. Even though he had the honor of working with the former Beatle on some of his 1980s stuff, including Angry, Collins still couldn't escape from one of the greatest authors of all time, even after receiving respect as a musician. It's a lesson that everyone should learn. Don't meet your heroes. During his appearance in A Hard Day's Night in 1964, Phil met the Beatles for the first time at the age of 13. Although his sequence was omitted from the finished product, he had the opportunity to collaborate with his hero at that period. Lightning, they say. It happened to Phil twice, even though lightning never strikes twice. In subsequent years, George Harrison requested his talents for the album All Things Must Pass. The realization that he had been cut again converted what was once a fantasy into a nightmare. The fact that his name wasn't listed on the credits was a revelation to him when he purchased the record from a record store. Because of that, Phil had a series of disappointing encounters with the Beatles, especially Paul. The final nail in the coffin was the 2002 Queen's Jubilee celebration at Buckingham Palace. According to what Phil told the Sunday Times, "I first met him in 2002 while working at a reception at Buckingham Palace. I asked Paul to autograph a first edition of the Beatles by Hunter Davies for me when he came out with Heather Mills, and I had a copy that McCartney had given me." Adding to that, he mentioned that our kid Phil has a slight Beatles obsession with Heather. Phil sensed an air of condescension. According to him, the Beatles' method of speaking made it seem like people had a hard time striking up conversations with them due to their celebrity status. Paul made an effort to apologize, but Phil didn't find it sincere enough. Phil ceased to be his fan and cut off any communication with him. Neither side is willing to let the 14-year dispute stop. He probably despises Paul McCartney more than anybody else. Phil Collins was sure a handful. Did you know that he also had a feud with the famous Simon Cowell of American Idol? Keep watching to find out more. Phil Collins versus Simon Cowell. Phil and Simon are both Englishmen who are well known in the music industry. One of them is a performer, and the other is successful in the music industry as a record executive and on-air judge. Not only have they been subjected to criticism and disdain from the general public, but also from satirical shows such as South Park and The Simpsons. However, despite these similarities, they have not been able to come together. Simon was previously referred to as the guy everyone loved to hate, as stated by the Los Angeles Times. He asserts that he only provides criticism that is constructive. Phil, like many others, is of the opinion that he is an impolite judge. Despite the fact that Phil acknowledged that he enjoys watching musical talent shows, he stated, quote, "I don't have any time for Simon Cowell. To put it simply, he is cruel, and that is the truth of the matter." To illustrate his point, he provided a particular instance from a show that Simon was hosting. He reprimanded a participant who sings on boats by saying, quote, I'd never go on a boat you were singing on because it would sink. He was concerned that the boat might sink. Phil stated that this went beyond the concept of constructive, tough love, and statements of this nature had an impact on the overall experience of watching the show. Additionally, Phil was reportedly asked if he would be willing to serve as a judge on American Idol. Despite the fact that he is not a fan of the format that the program employs, he stated that he has thought about the prospect and would love providing encouragement to the candidates. Asterisk. There are a few things that Phil Collins and Simon Cowell share in common with one another, and both of them are Englishmen. Collins is a well-known artist, while Cowell is a well-known record executive and on-air judge. Both of them are extremely influential personalities in the music industry. When it comes to popular culture, neither is a stranger to being mocked and ridiculed. Although Collins's music and personal life were routinely mocked during the height of his fame, the discourse surrounding him has become more tolerant in recent years. Critics and even some of Collins's fellow musicians were among those who engaged in such behavior. The acidic public character that Simon Cowell cultivated over the course of his career turned him into the guy everyone loved to hate, as the Los Angeles Times described it. Despite the fact that Simon Cowell has stated that his sole intention is to provide participants on the numerous shows for which he serves as a judge with constructive feedback, there are occasions when he appears to take pleasure in upsetting aspiring singers as well as his other judges. Cowell and Collins have both been subjected to, in addition to more pointed accusations from within the music industry, more lighthearted jabs from animated programs such as South Park and The Simpsons. Despite the fact that Simon Cowell became well known in the British music industry as a talent scout and executive, he gained widespread recognition among the general public as a result of his participation in talent shows such as Pop Idol and American Idol. Some individuals in the music industry who have taken issue with Simon Cowell have a more significant problem with the concept of talent shows than they do with any particular judge. For example, Elton John has rejected talent contests as being unhelpful and has declined to be a guest judge on American Idol. Phil Collins has not progressed to that length. In an interview that he gave to TV Guide in 2005, he compared the show and other programs that were comparable to it to longer-running variety shows, which he enjoyed watching. In the viewpoint of Collins, Stephen Cowell and his demeanor were the most negative aspects of American Idol. "I've got no time for Simon Cowell," he stated in response. "He is just cruel, and that's all there is to it." Collins made a specific reference to a moment on the show in which Simon Cowell attacked a woman whose day job was singing on boats. "I'd never go on a boat you were singing on because it would sink," he informed her of this. Collins stated that the entire experience of watching the show was tainted because Cowell operated in a manner that was superior to individuals whom he was apparently intended to assist. Collins did not respond when asked by TV Guide if he would ever participate in the American Idol competition as a guest judge. He gave some thought to the notion of providing genuine encouragement to the candidates, but he noted, "That show is such a format now, it would probably just be banging my head against the wall." Phil Collins versus Peter Gabriel. In the entertainment world, there are lots of rumors regarding feuds, particularly with celebrities such as Phil, who have a tendency to get involved in a great deal of them. In addition, they frequently occur amongst former cast members and bandmates, even when there was no animosity between them. At one point in time, Peter Gabriel was the founding frontman for Genesis. In 1970, Phil became a member of the band of which he took over, playing the drums and contributing backup vocals. They had been playing together for a number of years before Peter quit, at which point Phil took over as the lead vocalist. In order to make the band more successful in the marketplace, he altered the name of the band. In what way does the relationship stand? There is no rivalry between the two men. contrary to what some fans may believe about their connection. The year 2010 marked the year that Genesis was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In spite of the fact that both men were included in the induction, Peter did not turn up. This was not something he did on a whim, but rather because he had a conflict in his schedule. Even in the most significant moments of their lives, they have included each other. During the early 2000s, Peter reportedly remarried and wanted Phil to be his best man. This information comes from Rolling Stone. The fact that the band had changed was never anything that concerned him, and he believed that it was the greatest option. The band Genesis was established in Surrey in the late 1960s, and during the years, the band has seen a number of lineup changes. It was in August of 1975 when Peter Gabriel, who was one of the original members of the band, made the announcement that he was leaving the group. There were previously rumors circulating about his resignation prior to the news breaking, and these rumors were verified by a statement that was published in newspapers. One of the things that Gabriel mentioned in it was that he desired to devote more of his attention to his family. Additionally, he indicated that there was no animosity between him and the surviving members of the Genesis band, and that the idea of leaving the band had been on his mind for a really considerable amount of time. Phil Collins, who had joined Genesis in 1970, stepped up to the plate and became the new frontman after Gabriel quit the band. Gabriel's departure left Genesis without a lead singer, but Collins took over as the band's drummer. According to rock celebrities, it was common knowledge that Gabriel and Collins had some creative disagreements. When Collins became the new vocalist for Genesis, rumors began to circulate that Gabriel left the band because Collins wanted him to leave. Peter Gabriel disclosed the key reason for his leaving from Genesis in an interview that was conducted by Louder Sound. The birth of their daughter took place in 1974, but due to problems, the infant had to fight for her life. His wife gave birth to their daughter. During that time period, Gabriel was recording with the band, which was located many hours away. As a result, it was challenging for him to commute between his family and his place of employment. Because his daughter was able to survive, Gabriel was aware that from that point forward, he needed to prioritize his family. At the end of 1974, Gabriel communicated his desire to leave Genesis. However, the band was in the midst of a tour at the time, and he agreed to remain with the band for an additional 6 months in order to provide the band with sufficient time to adjust to life without him. Prior to the conclusion of the 6-month period, Gabriel was instructed to refrain from making any public statements. According to rock celebrities, Genesis held tryouts in order to locate a new vocalist. However, they were unable to find somebody who was a good fit for what they were looking for. At that moment, the band came to the conclusion that Phil Collins should take the lead role in the performances. In an interview, he discussed Gabriel's departure and stated that despite their conflicts, he loved Gabriel and never wanted him to leave Genesis. He also stated that he was saddened by Gabriel's leaving. "I had no intention of becoming a singer. He was someone I did not want to leave. I simply assumed control because someone else was required to do so," he stated, refuting the rumor that he desired Gabriel's departure. Phil Collins versus Kurt Cobain. The late Kurt Cobain was unwavering in his beliefs throughout his whole life. He was aware of the things that he cherished and those that he detested. Additionally, he offered both praise and criticism to a number of other musicians. Among the bands that he considered to be among the very finest in the world are the Japanese punk band Shun Knife and the Scottish indie band Teenage Fan Club. Other bands were also subjected to his criticism. He once commented, "We're not your typical Guns N' Roses type of band that has been around for a long time." This was in reference to Nirvana. It is completely devoid of any words to express. His feud with Axl Rose began as a result of that, and he went on to make a number of other insulting remarks. In addition to that, he had some issues with Phil Collins. When he was working with Melody Maker in 1992, he went on yet another attack. At the time, he was at the pinnacle of his popularity, but he was dissatisfied with the music industry and with traditional performers on the scene. "I despise Phil Collins, including every single one of his white male souls," he remarked. "I completely despise tie-dyed t-shirts as well." One aspect of this feud that is particularly noteworthy is the fact that it was not a fight between two parties. A public response from Phil was not provided in response to the rocker's nasty statements. His album, titled Both Sides, is widely seen as a rejection of Kurt's generation of rebellious individuals, yet this is the extent to which it went. The decade of the 1980s was just beginning looking silly when Collins first began to get traction as a solo artist. By wearing tie-dye shirts and/or a suit while he was crooning, Collins made rock and roll appear to have reached its peak middle age. This is despite the fact that Collins appears to be one of the most typical people who has ever achieved the status of a pop star. In the history of rock and roll, the game was traditionally played by young men, and Kurt Cobain was unable to tolerate what Collins stood for. "I hate Phil Collins, all of that while male soul," Kurt Cobain said in 1992 when he was discussing the status of rock music. He said that he was extremely dissatisfied with the genre of music that Collins had brought to the table. "To be honest, I despise tie-dyed t-shirts as well. If it weren't dyed with the urine of Phil Collins, I wouldn't wear a tie-dyed t-shirt." No matter what, Collins was able to reply by making one of the most predictable movements in the history of the world, even if grunge was the dominant music genre at the time. Collins seemed to sound much more out of touch than he had before when he listened to his subsequent album, which was titled Both Sides. He appeared to be the rock and roll equivalent of an elderly uncle, who occasionally attempted to get in touch with what the younger generation was listening to or playing. Despite the fact that he was still capable of writing hooks, the moment Smells Like Teen Spirit was released, a change was obviously in the air. Do you think we are done? Well, not yet. More like we are just getting started. Phil Collins couldn't just get along with everyone. Let's find out more. Other feuds and disagreements. During one time, Phil was referred to as the workaholic's workaholic. Additionally, he was once interviewed about and he was previously referred to as the workaholic's workaholic, that you are a perfectionist. For me, he was a complete idol. Someone once referred to him as a workaholic. During the years that were the most crucial for him, he was also known as Dude. Someone once referred to him as a workaholic. The majority of the time, however, he was sitting there and swinging his sword out with him. In addition to being a harsh and tough individual, he was also a man with a strong will of his own. Also, he was a decent human being. Also, he was a man with a firm resolve. On the other hand, he was a man who was unyielding in every respect. It was a challenging individual. He has had a difficult time maintaining strong ties with some of his friends and family members as a result of this. Moreover, this is something that each and every one of us was brought up with. And we are beginning to see how this has evolved over the course of the years. Fellow members of the band as well as those with whom he performed. Other individuals in the entertainment industry who have never collaborated with him have a negative opinion of him for a variety of reasons, including his fashion sense or even his level of popularity. There are certain feuds that go in both directions, and there are others that are rants that Phil has been able to go past. Phil Collins versus Roger Waters. Phil has said that there are certain performers whose music he does not enjoy, but on a human level, he does not hold any ill will towards them. Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull were among others to be included. The latter appealed to him more and more, but he is not a fan of the way that they were consistently grouped together in the early 1980s. Certainly, this sensation was reciprocal. In an interview with the Herald Journal, Pink Floyd vocalist Roger Waters revealed his own sentiments regarding Phil. In a particular interview, He did not appreciate how consistently present the musical icon was. In a different instance, he stated that he did not fit into the category, not only in the case of artists who wrote from the heart, but also in the case of those who wrote in order to fill space. After some time had passed, he said, "I always seem to end up attacking poor Phil Collins. It is solely due to the fact that he is so noticeable. He is exhibiting symptoms of a significant amount of it. He seems to be acting as if he is a vocalist or a lyricist, which is the impression I get from him. It has never been known that progressive rock bands have the most amicable connections with one another because of their musical style. If you take a look at every great progressive rock band from the 1970s, there is a strong possibility that practically every single one of them experienced some kind of huge fallout after they became significant in the music industry. Despite the fact that Collins was able to contribute to the success of Genesis for as long as he could, Roger Waters did not believe that Collins possessed the qualities necessary to become a genuine rock star. Despite the fact that Waters had gone far beyond what rock was doing with albums such as Radio Chaos, he conceded that Collins had nothing in common with what rock was all about. In spite of the fact that he admitted to being somewhat overly critical of Collins during his career, he was hesitant to refer to Collins as a genuine rock star because the majority of his songs were on the less difficult to listen to the end of the spectrum. This is not to say that there is anything wrong with it. Rather, it is a reflection of the fact that they were two different sorts of musicians. Collins's goal was to have people dance, but Waters's was to make music that causes people to come out of their lethargy and discuss the real issues that are plaguing the globe. Waters's goal was to make music that awakens people. Looks like Phil Collins just can't catch a break. It's like a broken record. Phil had yet again another feud with Noel Gallagher. This might be the most surprising one yet. Phil Collins versus Noel Gallagher. It was Noel's comments that knocked Phil below the belt. If the fact that he was a fake rocker wasn't enough, he became more hostile and personal in his tone. In addition to pointing out that sales do not necessarily indicate talent, the member of the band Oasis did not have any great things to say about his discography. Additionally, he stated that people despise him, and if they do not already, they ought to. A greater number of shots were fired at Noel during the legislative elections in 2005. Rather than criticizing his music, he criticized his political beliefs. He urged people to vote for Labor because he might run for office again if the Conservatives were to win the election. It was during this particular instance when Phil made the decision to respond to his critic at least once. He made an appearance on Room 101, a program on BBC Two that is devoted to discussing people's most vehement annoyances. His decision was to deal with Noel and Liam, who was his brother. As he put it, they are impolite and do not possess the level of brilliance that they believe they do. I won't sugarcoat this, but they have made an attempt to attack me on a personal level. An average of 50% of what Noel Gallagher says is typically a criticism of another person. Gallagher appeared to follow up where John Lydon had left off by generating headlines for some of the most abrasive and opinionated remarks to come out of a rock star. This occurred not long after Oasis achieved a great deal of success. He was more than willing to promote the Beatles, the Stones, and Oasis as the most successful bands in the world. Yet when he heard Phil Collins, he was convinced that he was listening to the work of the devil. Noel stated in the documentary Supersonic that his idea of success would be to have the severed head of Phil Collins in his refrigerator by the end of the decade. This was his understanding of what it would mean to be successful. Later, when he informed the press that he believed Collins was the Antichrist of music for composing his typical ballads, he would even go so far as to double down on his previous statement. While Collins made an effort to occupy the moral high ground, he eventually voiced his complaints about Noel. He stated that they hardly possessed any talent and that he was perplexed as to why they were dubbed rock stars. During the time that the first punk wave was hitting, Genesis was already struggling to survive. However, just as Collins was entering his phase of being an old statesman, Oasis emerged as the new generation of punks, with the intention of destroying his more pretentious track record. Phil Collins versus Led Zeppelin. Nearly every drummer of Phil Collins's generation has a healthy admiration for John Bonham, who was a member of Led Zeppelin. The animal in the background, which made his drumsticks sound like Thor's hammer whenever he played, was difficult to ignore, even if you didn't like what the band had to offer. It was difficult to ignore the animal. It's possible that Collins got the opportunity that the majority of people of his time could only dream of having by jamming with Zeppelin, but the experience ended up being very different from what he had anticipated. Collins had already been given the terrible duty of performing on both stages at Live Aid, which took place on 2 different continents. However, the true test of his endurance was when he was asked to perform behind a reconstituted Led Zeppelin for those few songs. Collins recalled how terrible Jimmy Page was to him throughout the day, and he stated that it was one of the few shows that he wished he could have walked out on. Despite the fact that it would never be the same without Bonzo behind the kit, Collins was able to recall how vicious Jimmy Page was to him. Page went so far as to reaffirm Collins's experience by stating that Collins was not nearly as experienced as he needed to be in order to perform classics such as Whole Lotta Love throughout the full show. It is already adding insult to injury to claim that he does not know the songs, but hearing one of the most prominent names in rock music declare that you're not even close to being able to compete with John Bonham was sure to do a number on anyone's ego. Now it's time to hear from you. Which one of these feuds was most surprising to hear about? Let us know in the comments. Also, smash that like button, subscribe, and click on the next video you see on your screen.